Russia's participation in Africa has garnered significant attention due to its growing influence. In addition to more conventional areas of interest like North Africa, this involves reviving Cold War-era partnerships in southern Africa and expanding ties in the Central African Republic and the Sahel region. Until the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia had little influence in Africa. After that, it regained its position as a significant player. The October 2019 Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi highlighted the advantages of Moscow's wide-ranging engagement throughout the continent, Russia's normative agenda, and easy access to Russian military technology. Moscow is attempting to strengthen and broaden its strategic ties throughout Africa. This is why in today's video, we are going to be talking about the recent arrival of a foreign Russian minister in Guinea. We will also be telling you more about the South Korean African Summit. But before we continue, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel to get important notifications whenever Russia does any major thing in Africa. Let's get right in. In a recent turn of events, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in Guinea on Monday on the first leg of a three-country African tour aimed at boosting support for Moscow. The visit was publicized on the social media platform Telegram by the Russian Foreign Ministry. Russian official media reported that Lavrov was set to continue his tour in Burkina Faso and Chad. Moscow is making the tour in an effort to increase support from continental nations in light of Russia's international isolation. Bear in mind that Russia witnessed a dramatic decline in ties with the West following its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. While the African Union and several African capitals opposed Russia's stance, more than half of African countries, including Guinea, abstained from UN resolutions calling for a withdrawal of Russian troops. During the second Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg in July of last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed several African heads of state. Russia declared its ambition to enhance economic and security ties with the continent of Africa and made promises centered on sending grain to many African countries. 17 African heads of state attended the summit despite the war, sanctions, and pressure from the West. There, they signed various agreements with Russia on preventing an arms race in space, cooperating in information security, and fighting terrorism on the continent. Moscow also pledged to write off further debt. Putin promised to deliver grain to some 6 African countries too. In November of last year, Russia's agriculture minister said Moscow had begun free shipments of grain totaling up to 200,000 tons to 6 African countries, as promised by President Vladimir Putin. The UN-mediated deal, dubbed the Black Sea Grain Initiative, sought to prevent starvation by increasing the supply of wheat, sunflower oil, fertilizer, and other goods on international markets, particularly those needed for humanitarian purposes. Russia's main economic interests in Africa have centered on its grains, arms, extractives, and nuclear power exports. More than 70% of all Russian trade with Africa in 2021 was carried out in just 4 countries: Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, and South Africa. Take note that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov aimed at the West and its supposed objectives in Ukraine and Libya during his Africa tour visit to the Congo. Lavrov has visited the African continent several times in the past couple of years as Russia seeks support, or at least neutrality, from many of its 54 countries in the wake of Ukraine. He said Russia supports the initiative of President Denis Sassou Nguesso of Congo, which aims to organize an inter-Libyan conference. He said this during a meeting with Sassou, who also chairs a high-level committee on Libya in the African Union. Note that Libya is split between 2 governments, one in the east supported by military strongman Khalifa Haftar, with whom Moscow has close ties, and the other, based in Tripoli and headed by Abdelhamid Dbeiba, a government recognized by the UN. What is happening in Libya is a tragedy, whose authors are NATO and its members, Lavrov said, adding that the same thing happened in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where the West wanted to impose its version of democracy. He said the most important thing today was to find an approach that assured the re-establishment of the country. Sassou Nguesso, like other world leaders, is convinced that a peace conference on Ukraine scheduled for mid-June in Switzerland makes no sense without Russia's participation. The The Russian Federation has limited economic relations with Africa compared to the Soviet Union, modern China, the United States, and the European Union, even with Russia's continuous efforts to forge closer commercial and trade ties with the continent. Moscow's capacity to provide comparatively inexpensive military and security services, including arms transfers, anti-insurgency training, and consulting services, thereby gives it a significant competitive edge over other international powers looking to increase their presence on the continent. Russia is Africa's main arms supplier. Between 2018 and 2023, 40% of the continent's purchases of large-scale weaponry came from Russia. This has exceeded the total amount of weapons imported from China, France, and the United States in those years. The dependence of African nations on armaments and equipment manufactured in Russia can be attributed to several factors. Many countries on the continent still own Soviet-era guns, which can be compatible with modern Russian weapons, which are typically less expensive than their Western counterparts. Additionally, the Kremlin has transferred armor, combat planes, and missile systems to many war-torn nations in Africa. Unlike the US and its allies, it does not condition its arms transfers on adherence to democratic ideals or the safeguarding of fundamental human rights. The West faces grave geopolitical quandaries as a result of Russia's incursions into Africa. While allowing Russia to grow further would negatively impact US and ally interests, taking direct action against it could backfire and end up bolstering Moscow's narrative, as France has just discovered. On the one hand, given that Africa is the continent with the youngest and fastest growing population, the West cannot afford to do nothing and rely solely on strategic patience. The continent faces formidable challenges that directly affect the security and stability of the entire world. Russia does not give significant aid or capacity building beyond the military security sphere. Therefore, it is both uninterested in and incapable of fostering sound and sustainable development in Africa. Rather, its entrenchment has significant risks, particularly for Europe, and will only exacerbate the problems that Africa faces. Critics believe that Russia's interest in Africa may stem from its aim to challenge Western supremacy, establish new markets, and obtain access to important resources. But it's crucial to understand that every country, including Russia, participates in international affairs to further its objectives and safeguard its interests. Russia's encroachment into Africa reflects the changing nature of international politics, as well as a growing interest in the continent. Even while there are worries about Russia's objectives, African leaders must take the time to find out what Russia is trying to do in Africa. By doing this, they can acquire a deeper comprehension of Russia's involvement in Africa and the consequences it has for African countries, as well as the international community at large. Lavrov's visit comes at a time when South Korea's president, Yoon Suk-yeol, hosts an Africa summit to tap minerals and vast export market. South Korea hosted a meeting this week with the presidents of 48 countries, and at the top of its agenda is aiding Africa's industrial infrastructure and digital transformation, citing the continent's abundant mineral riches and potential as a massive export market. Africa is a crucial partner for South Korea to promote its economic growth, according to Deputy National Security Advisor to President Yoon, Kim Tae-hyo, who also stated that cooperation with Africa is not a choice, but a necessity. 25 heads of state attended the maiden meeting alongside 23 representatives from other countries. According to South Korean officials, deepening connections in the field of minerals and resources will strengthen the nation's supply chains in vital sectors like batteries. South Korea plans to increase its official development assistance program to approximately $10 billion by 2030 to foster more collaboration with Africa. Additionally, it will offer $14 billion in export financing to promote its commerce and investment in the area. As one of the biggest energy consumers in the world, South Korea is also home to top semiconductor manufacturers and the world's fifth biggest automobile, both of which are actively promoting electrification. Collaboration with Africa, which produces 30% of the world's essential minerals, including manganese, cobalt, and chrome, is essential, according to Yoon's administration. Since Friday, Yoon has held meetings with the leaders of Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, and is scheduled to meet separately the heads of other states including Zimbabwe, Togo, Rwanda, and Mozambique. Trade with African nations currently accounts for less than 2% of South Korea's total imports and exports. Bear in mind that South Korea's outreach to the continent comes at a time when its neighbor, North Korea, seeks to break out of diplomatic isolation. However, do you think South Korea is aiding Africa's industrial infrastructure and digital transformation? Or they are doing this for personal interests, just like the West has always done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Turn on notifications too so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.